Hello.
Hey, Noah, thank you so much for agreeing to do this recording for the student of Kennesaw State University. Um, I'm actually, fortunately, for some whatever weird reason, become the professor that actually teaches software engineering department. And I just want my students to have a chance to see how software development work in real life, especially since they take in software architecture and design at the moment. So
Cool.
a couple of questions that I would like to ask, and I have the question on my phone here. Not that I'm ignoring you, I'm just reading the question off the phone.
Yep.
Um, the very first question I want to know is, what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
All right. So, what do I do on a day-to-day basis? So, at Weather at IBM, we primarily work on the Weather Channel website, weather.com. So, my day-to-day is generally about working on like the next thing. So, behind our business, we have we work off 4 quarters. And within the quarters, we have sprints. So, from a higher level business standpoint, the business has a general idea of they want to work on improving revenue or like profit or some kind of thing, or increase user interaction, increase page views, increase performance, any kind of metrics like that. And we all kind of work towards that goal for the quarter. Day to day, I'll be pulled into meetings relating to discovery or research, or sometimes I'll have like a queue of people at my desk asking me questions about technical implementations of how do you solve XYZ, or how do you debug a certain situation. Um, and primarily, there's also knowledge that I have pertaining to various APIs that the weather company provides. So they'll come to me about like um, what kind of fields does something support versus another version of that same API, which would be later upgraded.
Okay,
So those are examples.
okay. So based on what you said, then it sounds like you still do a lot of coding, or is your primary job just pretty much meeting with the business users, understanding their need and the requirements, then sort of draw out the architecture and the design to make sure that the team, which will be led by a lead developer to implement or convert your design into actual code.
I would say that I still play a hand in coding. I would say maybe my coding has like dropped down considerably since taking on this role, but I still have access to you know uh, Git in terms of like committing code.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally, I'll like uh, fix a bug or a ticket, or do something that maybe a lead developer wouldn't really be able to.
Okay.
Um,
So
um,
so
I
sorry for interrupting, but
yeah.
I the general idea of from all the architects that I have worked with, they usually the one who do high level design, especially making sure that system integration is seamless among all their systems that they have within their space. Right. So say if you're in their digital department at IBM, which is where the channel, then you have to know all the systems that you have in your portfolio, the main functionality of each, and how can system A interact with system B and vice versa. Whereas the lead developer would be the one that responsible for the low level design of a particular system. They would be the one that leading the team to accomplish whatever requirements that the business has given them, as well as the high level architecture that their architect has drafted out for them. Or at least that's been my experience. So I haven't really seen the architect that actually code, and that maybe due to the different culture of the companies that we work for. But do you think the reason why you still doing a lot of coding is because you sort of in the transitional period between the lead into an architect. I mean, you are an architect, but pretty new into the role, right? So do you think a lot of
Yeah,
that? So because you were a lead developer before, a lot of the knowledge still carry on, and the team still rely you on committing code instead of just purely focus on making sure that you thinking of all the non-functional requirements like system reliability, no downtime, data redundancy in your design and architecture.
yeah, I would say that it's also part of my transition from a lead developer into an architect role. I would say that when I was the lead developer, I was kind of like pretty much like the general SME for a lot of our stack.
Mm-hmm.
And because I left that role to architecture, no one really left that void. I mean, filled that void.
Mm-hmm.
So I was still relied upon for kind of leading and teaching about the various nuances of our systems.
Okay.
Um, I do code to produce prototypes as an example.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're like trying to create like a new system, I'll try to create like maybe a few prototypes, but I won't actually implement the entire thing. I'll draw diagrams and kind of like have verbal communication or whiteboarding sessions to explain my ideas to other developers, and then they would
Mm-hmm.
eventually create the services that interact with each other.
Okay. So since you were a lead developer before, what do you think is the biggest distinguish or the distinction between a lead developer and the architect? What is the number one factor that identified the two from one another?
Um, when I was a lead developer, I would say that I had the general mindset of an architect. And the key point of the mindset of an architect is that you kind of have a very broad sense of high level overview of the system and like
Mm-hmm.
how the pieces interact with each other. So, talking about a website, you would have to know like what's the server in which you're hosting the website. Is it like a static hosting site? Is it served by like a language of some sort? Is it fronted by a CDN, a content
Mm-hmm.
delivery network? Um, how does the data change day to day on the website? Is it like driven by a CMS? How does the
Mm-hmm.
data get to the static site if it's static site?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and more for weather specifically, we deal with dynamic data every single day, but not even really day.
Mm-hmm.
It's like every 5 to 15 minutes, data changes because the data is very dynamic.
Okay.
Um, so that's kind of like a one of those problems you have to solve as an architect for weather, but it's pretty much we've already solved it
Okay.
because it's a general caching solution that we had to do.
So, what do you say was the biggest factor that allowed you to become an architect from the lead developer? What helped you to get that promotion?
There was a general void in the web architect role at Weather at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and I was pretty much not really gunning for the role, but I was I showed general interest in the role to begin with because that was like one of my things. Like it between me and Young, we've actually worked at UPS, and I've kind of said I wanted to be an architect one day, and then here I am as an architect. Um, but to kind of like set myself apart from other developers,
Mm-hmm.
I had to show general interest in the entire system, not just our own stack and our own code.
Mm-hmm.
I would also kind of have to know the little details about why things are done a certain way. And also like show an interest in how the
Mm-hmm.
business works,
Mm-hmm.
and that's pretty much it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's wise for company to hire architect from outside sources instead of promote from within? Because I think when I think of architect is that the person need to be familiar with all their available system within their space that they're working for, right? So hiring external candidate will take a lot longer time for them to learn the systems, as well as maybe create this harmony among all the lead developers that the company currently has who may be gunning for a promotion or who may be ready for the next step in their career. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I generally agree with what you said, especially about the part about it causing disharmony.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, I feel like if an internal person were promoted into an architect role, they definitely would have the knowledge of the systems and how they should definitely evolve. Whereas an outsider, the benefit of having an outsider come in is that it's a newer look
Mm-hmm.
on the entire system in general.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they'll be able to provide another, like an insight on how it should be architected more efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
But the suggestion by that outsider may provide a lot of friction with the general idea of it could impact how the business works in a team environment.
Okay.
Say, for example, before, usually teams are divided by the general systems that they're working with.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, if that were to change, that would totally divide and reshape the teams.
Okay. Okay. So pretty much to become an architect at any company, the number one thing you have to know is you have to show your interest in the role. And so an interest, some of the actions that you could take is be involved or have general knowledge about all the systems that happening around you, not just the system that your team is responsible for. Would you say
Yeah,
that is correct?
yeah, I would say that's correct. Like when I first started at Weather, I was primarily just like a software engineer, but I was more with the performance side.
Mm-hmm.
And as I grew accustomed to the code base, I started picking up things about like how do ads and third parties work, how do we get our weather data.
Mm-hmm.
Like at first, we know that a regular developer would say like, okay, you just make this API call and you get your data,
Mm-hmm.
but that's generally not enough because you need to know like at what point does the data change in that API call? What systems are involved with serving that API call?
Mm-hmm.
If you make a change from
Right.
Point A, how does it impact
Right.
point D?
Right. Like all the different security that currently revolving around API call, especially with Google pops up, since a lot of people kind of switching toward that model. Right. You just also gotta use like the Google service account and generate the access token for it. So a lot of the security aspect you would have to be responsible for. I believe. Do you do
Yes,
any security? Do you think of security at all in your design architecture?
yes. I think of security. It's more like I try to keep the best practices in mind in the
Mm-hmm.
design. So like some common things are like when you're developing a new service, you want to kind of like um, plan for how do you get sensitive data, or
Mm-hmm.
um, are you planning on storing sensitive data? And sometimes when the business asks you that, you kind of have to say, um, if we do store sensitive data, we actually have to follow, you know, uh, like PII kind of
Mm-hmm.
regulations or PCI compliance.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the business, wouldn't really want to get into that. So
Mm-hmm.
you could probably, that would be like a way of saying like, if we take on the risk of getting this data, we could, easily dump like millions of dollars into this project.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if we were offload it to another service that's specific for that purpose,
Mm-hmm.
then we would be saving millions of dollars.
Okay. So right now the students in the class are learning about high level design of when you read requirements, how do you sort of categorize them into different components, right? But because they are so early in their career, they're gonna be like entry level. I don't really from past experience I didn't get a chance to really do any system design when I was entry level, but I started getting into being able to actually lead the design of a small portion of the system when I become a senior. The reason why I want this talk to is so that I want them to know they may not have a chance to do the actual designing, but whenever the lead developer or the architect or anybody hand them any design document, especially architecture diagrams, they could look at it and have a solid understanding of exactly what the architect wants because they are the one who will transform the design into the actual product. So, at what point in your career did you actually start designing a system?
Um, I actually started designing the system during my lead developer days. So that's kind of like how I pretty much pioneered and like pretty much owned the entire system
Okay.
for weather in a way. Um, we had I wouldn't say a legacy system. We had a system that was fairly popular. Back then it was called Drupal and Angular. We call
Mm-hmm.
it. Basically, it's a module system on top of Drupal that allowed us to serve Angular
Mm-hmm.
modules onto the page. Um, and basically, it served its purpose for a while, and then we had to kind of come up with a solution that was a little bit better in terms of decoupling the CMS with
Mm-hmm.
the presentation layer of the website.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then we had this project which we called Nerf.
Mm-hmm.
Nerf like Nerf darts. Um, the acronym is NERF, which stands for Node Express React File Core.
Mm-hmm.
And then not the weird thing, but the thing about the stack is that we did not end up using two of the things in the name. So we still use Node, we still use React,
Mm-hmm.
but React's kind of a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
But we use Koa for
Mm-hmm.
our server, and then we use we still use REST APIs
Okay.
for
So
making data calls.
so it doesn't sound like you guys using a lot of the regular object oriented language that school taught us to use like C sharp, Java, F sharp, or C
Oh
plus
yeah,
plus, right? So that is like one of the good thing about software development is you don't you could be brand new into the profession, but you could still contribute to any project or looking for any job because technology changes every day.
yep,
But the more experience you have, the better you can see how everything linked together because at the end we use technology to achieve a purpose, right? But first we need to have a purpose first before we can decide on the technology stack that we can use. Agree?
yep.
So if if you are to give advices to those students right now who are looking for internship, co-op, entry level developers, what is the number one advice you would give the students?
Um, I kind of gave this advice for interviews.
Mm-hmm.
So in general, for interviews, whenever you're interviewing for a position or internship, the one thing that I highly recommend everybody to do, even if it's like towards the end of the interview,
Mm-hmm.
is ask questions. And much like you're asking me,
Mm-hmm.
you ask questions about like how does this work or how does that work? How does the system in general work?
Right.
And it kind of shows your overall curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And then the thing that adds, that takes it over the top is how you continue to ask questions based off the previous one. So, say for example, you ask me, how does weather work in terms of the website, and then I give you an answer, and then you follow up with another question based off that previous answer that I gave.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of evolving of a question and answer session shows how, like, how much interest and like your resolve to figure out how a system is architected.
Right, but it's also so a general understanding of the things that we are discussing about, right?
Yes.
Like if you don't understand it, there's no way for you to have a follow up question based on the feedbacks or the response that you gave initially.
Yep. And then the other part is, if you're able to make your interviewer stumble, it's like, say, isn't that like a bad practice to do it for architecture? Yeah. And then Dale's like, yeah, I agree with that. And then you kind of like have this, understanding of like, they kind of went through this architecture. They understand that it's bad, but they couldn't, avoid it due to
Mm-hmm.
XYZ circumstances. It's
But
kind of,
that's those are I feel like more for people who already have experience. You're talking about students who has little to no experience at all. When you or I ask them technical questions, obviously they might not be able to answer or think of the next question to ask.
yeah.
In general though, if they don't know what you say or they don't understand something, what do you expect the response to be? So that you would still consider them for the role. If like how do they say that they don't know but they will find out more about it, basically.
Um, so if it's like completely beginner in a way,
Mm-hmm.
in general, like showing that interest is enough for me to consider them, especially if it's so in general for like a lead, not a lead role, but sorry, a developer role or software engineer role.
Mm-hmm.
We give them an assignment during the interview to kind of like work through a problem and see how they come about the solution.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Sometimes we would even give them access to use Google
Mm-hmm.
and look up the questions, and based off how your kind of like your mindset about how you go about solving a problem
Mm-hmm.
goes into like how we think um, you work, with the problems that we face day to day.
Mm-hmm.
We also do something where um, maybe they're not able to solve the problem, but how well do they interact with other people
Mm-hmm.
to solve the problem? Because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times a developer would come to another developer and ask for help,
Right.
or, pair program.
Mm-hmm.
So those kind of situations we like to put in front of the
Mm-hmm.
interviewee and see how they react.
Okay. Okay. Really good. Thank you so much. Let me see. So what tool do you actually use to do diagramming? Because right now I'm actually telling my students to just ditch Visio in general because it's a pain to use.
Okay.
I actually recommending them to use Jar.io, which is the tool that I personally use and one of definitely my favorite diagramming tool.
R.io. Can
Huh?
you spell that?
Jar.io, DRAW.io is on by Google.
Oh, draw. Okay, okay, okay. Um, for the software that I use Lucid Chart.
Google Chart?
Lucid Chart.
Oh, Lucid Chart.
Yeah.
Yeah, I look into that too. That's also a tool to use. But don't you need to pay a license for it?
Yeah. So at IBM
Yeah,
they
yeah,
have the license.
yeah.
Um,
See, Jar.io is free.
yeah. I mean, it doesn't take much to get started.
Right, right.
Like
Yeah,
we
right now
can
they
go with
probably
light building.
best to just start out with Dia, which is it's been there for ages. It's free, super
Mhm.
lightweight to use. Um, so if do you say they should focus on the technology stack after figuring out there's software engineer space that they want to deal with. For example, for me, I'm dealing heavily with backend and distributed system. So I use a lot of Java, Spring, all the other libraries. But for you, you would use something like Node.js. A lot of the web front end technology are just like standalone web app where you don't really need like Java or power any of the programming languages that actually provide a powerful processing for like million of data. Um, do you think they should focus on figuring out whether they want to be, more on the digital side, like mobile development versus strict backend versus like a data analytics technology stack, or
Um,
what stack should they focus on if they just want to be broad? Because beggars cannot be choosers. Fresh out of school, when whatever company offer the job, you're gonna take it, right? Not gonna play like hardball hardball to get. Right. So if you have a technology recommendation for them to learn, that would definitely help them to just land a generic developer job. What would that technology be?
um, Specifically for architecture, um, I think most architects are somewhat of polyglots, like where they know multiple languages.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I was in Java and
Mm-hmm.
UPS, and then I pretty much switched to pretty much all JavaScript,
Mm-hmm.
especially like for backend services too. So any kind of API that I needed to make, I would make it in JavaScript
Mm-hmm.
due to like how quick it is to set up. Um, it kind of really depends on how, if you're taking on a new role, how that company's roles systems are architected. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, if you're dealing with like microservices, when you're working on a service, it's a very simple service because microservices are kind of like very small pieces of logic
Mm-hmm.
that run on the service.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of like my general gist of it. It's very simple. It's not overly complicated. If it is
Mm-hmm.
overly complicated, then it maybe you should consider breaking it out
Mm-hmm.
into more pieces. Um, so in general, knowing like one or two languages is good enough to start a role.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely need to know concepts of design, um, software design patterns.
Mm-hmm.
You got to know the general CRUD, at least NBC.
Mm-hmm.
Um, KISS, keep it simple,
Mm-hmm.
stupid. Uh, what there's dry, don't repeat yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And some design principles, they kind of like have a certain set of situations. Like so, microservices as an example. Generally, microservices, if you were to develop it, they are not necessarily dry
Mm-hmm.
because you can have one service that is built with Spring, and then maybe another service that's built with struts.
Mm-hmm.
And if struts goes down, the other one doesn't because
Right.
it's built with a different set of software.
Right.
Um, that's specifically for microservices, and then you're dealing when you're dealing with like high volume systems,
Mm-hmm.
you may end up needing to know like what a message queue is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, for web development in general, you definitely need to know about a web server. Like how does the web server work?
Mm-hmm.
What is HTTP? Like hypertext transfer protocol. How do you make a request to a website and get back a response?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also like knowing and building out your own web server is actually a really good way to understand how all that works.
Mm-hmm.
um, and can like kind of like make you level up to the next level of software engineer.
Okay. Okay. Well, those are really, really good advices to give to the students. I don't have anything else to ask. Thank you so much for agreeing to again to this interview sessions. Thank you for giving them insight into what architect does on a day-to-day basis. Um, if they have any more questions, I will forward them to you. And if you have time, you can respond to those questions
Sure.
whenever you want, so I can bring it back to them as well. But that's all I have. And by the way, these I don't think the class know yet, but Adalbert here was also a Kennesaw alumni. So Kennesaw, we're not really losing to Georgia Tech at all. We have people in high management role that really can compete with anywhere else in the country. So definitely that owl pride for sure.
Yeah, and definitely, whenever I look at resumes, I don't consider the the school behind it
Mm-hmm.
as much as the skills and like
Right.
how personality to person. I mean, you definitely the students really just drive all of that, not
Right.
necessarily at school.
Right. I think it's really up to their individual level of effort on how much they want to learn out of whatever. Like for a software engineer, they really don't have to become a developer. They can be quality assurance. They can be business analyst. They can do product management. So there are a lot of career paths. It's just
Yep.
whatever they want to carve out for
Yep.
themselves in the future. That's what I need to start dedicating time to and practicing. If they want to be
Yeah. Definitely.
coding, then their coding is so weird because the more time you spend on it, the more comfortable you get. So definitely practice more on coding if they want to be like a developing systems. Okay, but that's all I have. It's also getting late, so sorry for keeping you up so late, and thank you so much again. I
No
share the
problem.
video with you. Want to have it on YouTube? Okay. I'm gonna end the
Okay.
recording. 1 second.